Sliding into your screen is not just any coffee bag. It's a Roastar coffee bag. Don't need thousands. Personalized just 25 in Roastar's Design Lab. No design experience needed. Choose a pattern, add your logo and text, or create something memorable with AI. Being made in the Midwest, you can expect it on your doorstep in no time. Now that was smooth.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Coffee People Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Woltz. The show is presented by Roastar Coffee Packaging, found online at roastar.com. The Coffee People Podcast is part of our Roast West Coast Coffee Network. You can find out a lot more about it on roastwestcoast.com. There'll be recaps, our Coffee Smarter podcast, and so much more. If you haven't poured yourself a cup of coffee, now is the time to get started. Our guests today are John and Luigi Di Ruocco. I think I pronounced that close. From Mr. Espresso. From Mr. Espresso, you can find them online at mrespresso.com and thecafeoak.com. Both of those links will be in our show notes. Welcome to the podcast, John and Luigi. I appreciate that you're here.
Thank you for having us.
If you wouldn't mind just kind of saying, I appreciate you doing this and doubling down here a little bit, but which one of you is John and which one of you is Luigi for the audience?
I'm Luigi. I'm the youngest of the family, and that's me.
Yes, I'm John Di Ruocco. I'm part of the family here. But I've been doing this since the beginning. Since my dad started the company around 1976, I've been involved, and now I'm currently in charge of kind of vice president of coffee, in charge of coffee procurement, quality control, and overseeing the production. So,
well, and you just mentioned since your father, Carlo, started the company, it is a family business and still a family business, I believe, correct?
Yes.
That always creates a lot of interesting dynamics, which I'm hoping to get into a little bit. But since you have a long history in it, even before you were probably in the workforce, do you have first memories of this coffee experience that you can go back to and say, this is kind of the start for me?
Sure. Yeah. I've thought about this. I don't really have like a very strong first memory of coffee, I guess. I think probably my earliest memories were, we used to live in Italy for a little while, and maybe, and we lived with my two aunts, and maybe just my first memories are probably just my two aunts just brewing coffee on the mocha pot on the stove, which is, that was just the way you drank coffee in Italy. That's just the way you did it. But maybe one of the more vivid memories is shortly thereafter we moved here, and I remember my dad trying to roast coffee at home in one of those little things that you stir on the stovetop, and just like really smoking up the entire kitchen, the entire house, because he wasn't the first time doing it. He wasn't expecting it to be that smoky, and my mom said something like, "Yeah, you're not doing that again."
Probably is something that I've been told that I was doing, but I don't remember myself. But my father, or our father, used to bring some of the early clients that he had to our house, because he had the espresso machines in the garage kind of set up, and that's where it was his first workbench for testing the machines and prep, getting them ready for installation. And so there was a restaurant client that met me years later, and my dad liked to tell this story too a lot. But he when they were talking in the backyard, I think I ran over there, was a little kid, and was tugging on my dad's shirt or something like that, and it kept saying, like, cappuccino machine. And that was, probably the earliest story I've heard about me referencing coffee or anything like that. And then, I saw that client when I started working here in 2001 professionally, and the client even told me the same story about the machine. And I can only imagine that was probably pretty annoying. But yeah, that was.
I was also a little kid running around in my parents' business and annoying people, so I can relate to that a little bit. Um, could you tell, our Mr. Espresso has been around for 45 plus years, but not everyone who's listening to the show is going to know what that is or, what the company has done. Could you give us a little background on the company and where it started?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll take that one. I guess my dad always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. He kind of tried a couple different things before he tried to do espresso machines. In the mid '70s, he was actually going to. Story's kind of forgotten, but he was in elevators. He was actually got his elevator contractor's license. He was thinking about starting his own elevator company, but he had the opportunity to import some used espresso machines from his home from someone he knew in Italy. He did that. He imported those machines, and because he had a technical background, he was able to repair those machines and fix them up, and he started selling them to the Italian community mostly, because that was really at that time espresso in the mid '70s was mostly the Italian community and a little bit around college campuses like UC Berkeley and things like that. So. And he saw that since those sold, then he went to Italy and tried to buy new machines. And the popular machine at the time was the Gaggia machine, the lever machine, and those are quite popular. And he went to go see Gaggia, and they turned him down. They refused to sell him machines. So then he went to go see another manufacturer, a smaller manufacturer at that time called Aurora. And I guess because they were smaller, they decided to sell them machines. So we started selling new machines at that point. And then later on, people would always ask him, where can I get good coffee? Where can I get good coffee? And there are a couple of roasters, here and there he would recommend, but he was never really happy with the quality of the coffees that was being roasted, because it was, at that time, espresso was like synonymous with just a simple dark roast. You just take something and you roast it very dark, and that was espresso. So he thought there could be more nuance and complexity to it. So the way the coffee was served in his area, he used to be very close to Naples. So I think it was the early '80s. We're not quite sure the exact year. I think it was like '82ish that he decided to start roasting coffee. So we moved out of the garage and we got a warehouse where we were able to start roasting coffee.
Yeah, Luigi, you mentioned that you started working there professionally in 2001, 25 years after kind of the origin and give or take 20 years after the roasting begins. Was there ever, for either of you, but I think Luigi first, was there ever a chance that you wouldn't go into this business? Was there a different path at some point that you thought, what, I'm kind of targeting you, Luigi. I'm the oldest and I have a youngest brother. I went to work with my dad and my youngest brother didn't. So I'm wondering if you had any thoughts at some point. I'm going to go find my own path.
Yeah, I never was planning on working here. I'm the youngest by 10 years under John, and then our sister's 13 years older than I am. So I was like way after them. And, I was the first one born here. And generationally, like what I grew up around was, I don't want to say significantly different, but it was distinctively different than I think what John and Laura, Laura's a sister, but what they grew up around. They were essentially, the first generation of immigration, and then they came in with, these very European parents, and they also, I think that they were just trying to make it in this new country, and so by the time I was born, they were a little more well established, and then I was American born, going to school, and the people that I was around, I think, were probably a little different. And I was mainly concerned about when I was younger, like why my friends had so much more freedom than I did, and they could move up. And I'm sure that Laura and John felt the same way, but even to a higher degree when they got here. I mean, not that we were like locked down or anything back then. It's just that there's a different a type of principles we were raised on, being that we were just like coming out of from parents who had recently immigrated from Europe, and so all my life I always was more concerned about like playing basketball or hanging out with my friends. So the company wasn't really relying on me to help get it off the ground, whereas with Laura and John, they were like able-bodied at that time and able to help. So they were like an integral part of the extra labor laying around in those early days, like help the company get started. So I didn't really have to work with the company until I was a teenager in the summers. But by that time, I was really not interested in it at all. I can make a little bit of extra money on the side in the summers, but like I said, I rather it would have been out running around or playing basketball with my friends or whatever, So my goal was to go and work in like finance after graduating from college and having a job in that area. But a couple of years into the corporate world experience, I started to just feel disconnected from it, and realizing that I preferred to have more of a small business, entrepreneurial, family business type of dynamic in my life. And so at my own like recognition, like I just kind of finally realized that there was this opportunity right in front of me that I could just pursue that would sort of fill what I felt like I was lacking in my corporate experience, So that's how I ended up, And I knew my dad was contemplating, what to do after, he never actually retired officially, but he was claiming that he was going to start getting ready to retire at that time too. So I think that helped lure me back a little bit too.
John, you might have been drafted into the business, but how about you? Was there ever a motivation to branch off, or was it kind of from the beginning you were just ingratiated into it?
Yeah, from the time this business started, which I was about 10 or so, until later, and then I went to school. At first I didn't know what I was going to do, but then my third year of college I had to declare a major, so I ended up getting into architecture, and I was on a 5 year. Ended up being on a 5 year plan, so I did that. So I studied that for 3 years. I got a bachelor's degree in architecture from UC Berkeley. But from the time I was about 10 up until maybe I graduated in 1990, so about 88, 89, I was pretty involved in the company because, like I said, it was just by necessity. But then about 89, right around that time, a couple of years before I graduated, my dad, he started to be a little bit more self-sustaining. So I was a couple of years I wasn't as involved, and I thought maybe I was going to go into architecture. I wasn't really sure. I was kind of debating it. And then I graduated in 1990. That was the beginning of a recession. And so, and especially that recession construction was hit pretty hard. So then the first thing to go, and usually in the recession, is architecture jobs. So firms were laying 50, 60, 70% of their staff off. There weren't any jobs. So I managed to get an internship for a few months, about 6 or 8 months. But that was also the period where my dad's business was growing quite a bit. The 90s was a big boom period. So he was asking me to come and join him in the company. He did help me get the internship, so he was supportive of that. But then it got to a certain point where he really needed the help, and maybe he saw that the career-wise, but the architecture wasn't going anywhere. He asked me to come back and work for him. So I was a little uncertain, but I decided just to, like I said, I didn't like the firm where I was at, so I just decided to join my dad around 91 or 92, and been here ever since. And then when I came back, he really needed technicians, so I was the first couple of years I was a technician out in the field, he saw I had a knack for coffee. I think at one point, there's a story, but I don't want to tell you the story because it'll take too much time. But he at one point, but I was telling him, hey, Dad, because he was doing everything. I was like, Dad, you can't run the company and be doing the buying and the quality at the same time. I wasn't petitioning for myself. I just thought he needed to kind of like, it needed to be a dedicated position. So after a couple of years, he decided to make that would be my job, was to be the quality control supervisor and then buy coffee. The one thing I wanted to mention, Luigi mentioned the generational difference, and one thing I don't know if it's ever been mentioned, but I always felt my parents were like, like all of our peers, their parents were they're baby boomers, but my parents, like our parents, our family, coming from the old country, especially my dad was from the South, my mom was from a little bit more traditional. I always felt they were more part of the previous generation. They were more like my friends' grandparents,
Sure.
Rather than like baby boomers, so they never really fit that role of the baby boomers. They were a little bit more traditional and old fashioned in that way. So,
Well, you've obviously, the business has stayed within the family, and now the two of you work together, and your sister works with you guys. How do you manage that family dynamic and can you keep it separate, work and family? I mean, is there a dividing line, or is it kind of all one big melting pot? I like that you're both wondering who's going to answer first.
I don't know. It definitely doesn't run like a regular business, that's for sure. And but it's not like we try also when we're at home or outside of the workplace not to just talk about work too. Um, so I mean, it does kind of all melt together to a certain extent. Um, but when we're here, I think that um, we recognize that there's a lot of quirks of having a family business, and with those quirks, there's a lot of like positives, and a lot of those things are good things. So I think we have gotten used to recognizing that it's just different running a family business, and accepting that that's okay, and not having to, in some cases you do want to measure yourself against real world practices and things we could be doing, but at the same time it's also sometimes refreshing or liberating not to have to worry about that entirely. We just do our own thing, so, and that makes us unique and also strong at the same time.
yeah, we also have kind of like our roles are very, very different. So we each have our own lanes, and we kind of operate within those lanes, and we know where the limits are when we're crossing into another lane and so on. So it works out that way. Just division of responsibility.
Sure.
It kind of helps.
Prevent fistfights in the boardroom, I would imagine. I have two brothers, so I can imagine the competitiveness to some extent. The name Mr. Espresso is a very catchy name. I mean, I think there's a reason why it's stuck so long. You also recently opened a cafe. I'm wondering why take this new step, after so long in business, to add a brick and mortar, and how does that fit into the future of the company?
I'll let John. You can tell the first part of the story, and then I'll tell the second part.
Yeah, the name. Yeah, I guess the name was just, I think, we operated for a couple of years without a business license, I think, so finally, I think we really, we say the business started in 78, but I think it really started around 1976. And then when we finally had to get a business license, my parents were trying to figure out a name. And so they were trying to figure out what the name. And then I think at that time, Mr. Coffee was, everyone had a Mr. Coffee. It was ubiquitous with coffee brewers was a Mr. Coffee, so it was just kind of, they kept saying, I think my dad or somebody just threw out the name Mr. Espresso, and it was just like, why not? There's a Mr. Coffee, so why not, Mr. Espresso? So I think it just kind of stuck there. Yeah. Like I said, Mr. Coffee was just huge back then. And it was Mr. Coffee was a coffee maker, was a Mr. Coffee. Yeah.
The business itself grew out of a wholesale relationship with with clients. You sell them the machines, and then you start to sell them the coffee, and then it becomes a relationship based on product and service. And that business, where we were here in Northern California, the birthplace of farm to table California cuisine, and a lot of the culinary capital or one of the culinary capitals of the United States. So the restaurant scene here was really exploding, and we were naturally placing our products into many of those places and beyond that. So our business was growing within the wholesale model. I think my parents were considering coffee shop locations in the first 10 years or 15 years of the business. And I think there was at one time an actual location that was being looked at, and it didn't work out. And I think that might have given them the impression that they shouldn't be doing it. John can clarify for me. And then later on, I've always gotten the impression that, by the time I arrived in 2001, my dad was, at that point, 67 years old already. And the wholesale business was firmly established. And it's kind of like, well, why do you want to open a cafe? It's going to be nothing but a yes, And, but I was really coming in with well, we should have a cafe. Let's do this. And I think John, being a bit wiser and more experienced, also knew there would be challenges. I think getting everyone on the same page with having a coffee shop during those years too. And so I kind of my personal story with the coffee shop is I ended up opening a few shops in San Francisco with a separate partner, and it was a place called Coffee Bar, and we ended up having 3 locations. And so from about 2007 to 2000, I'm still a part owner of the 2 locations that are still open today, but I was probably pretty involved in that for about 8 or 9 years. Eventually the Mr. Espresso kept requiring more and more of my time. I was doing both essentially, more of my time was always spent here. But eventually, the need for a retail presence, it's hard to escape that as a wholesale business. And so, around 2019, the city of Oakland was really booming. A lot of exciting things were happening here. The Bay Area economy was really booming in general, but Oakland was a beneficiary of that. And we saw a location in downtown Oakland where, me and John went and looked at it, and we're like, this is probably the best location in all of Oakland. And at the time, it was. So we signed the lease, but then the lease didn't get signed until January of 2020.
Of course.
Mr. Espresso finally opens up finally signs a lease to open up its own coffee shop, and then the world event that no one ever thought was going to happen happened. And so we had to wait for a while, and then in May of 2023, we finally opened after a lot of hesitation and dragging. But yeah, so now we have, it's almost 2 years we've been open now, and so that's our first official company retail location, basically.
What makes that space, a value add to the business? What do people experience when the people walk in? Do they go, "Oh, it's Mr. Espresso," or does it have its own feel, its own design, its own vibe that you think makes it part of that essential Oakland experience?
Well, we always start from a place of our heritage, which our mom is French, but our dad's Italian, and then the company itself has always been more Italian forward, being that we're the style of coffee and the espresso and etc. So the coffee culture side is primarily Italian, and so for us, we always think about how can we do this with an Italian forward or Italian angle to help resonate with our story. And so we call it an Italian-inspired coffee bar. But you do have to. You start from the premise of how can we make this place as Italian as possible, while being fully aware that in Italy people just drink espresso, and that a business here cannot survive by only serving single shots of espresso all day long. People who in a coffee culture like the United States, where that's not the main method of consuming coffee. So we designed that place with a big, long 17-foot bar. We encourage customers to walk up to the bar and order like they're at a bar. But we do have conventional coffee drinks and some special drinks you'd find in a contemporary cafe. So it's kind of a blend of like an Italian-inspired cafe, but also a contemporary or modern coffee shop that you'd find in the United States too. And even though we're an Italian company per se, it's at the core or foundation of everything that we do. We're also a Northern California company too. So our entire existence has been here in the Bay Area, and we've been influenced by the culinary scene here. So we're a combination of our Italian heritage and the Bay Area culinary scene that we've grown up in. And so it's hard for that not to influence us as well when we're doing something.
John, as the person who is responsible for quality and buying coffee, you've seen a lot of changes, especially over the last, say, 10, 12 years, and as specialty has really exploded. I mean, there's always changes, but in particular, this demand for different flavor profiles has grown. How do you keep Italian style, traditional roast styles relevant? I mean, in your business, I mean, it's not as in the specialty market. I don't want to say it's not as seen as much anymore, but I feel like that marketplace has gotten a lot bigger. There's a lot more people looking for different things, or kind of like craft beer used to, wanting to try the new thing over and over and over again. It's always got to be the new thing. How do you keep that flavor profile in the forefront of your customers' minds, and in quality wise, what you do?
Yeah, it's a little tricky. I guess we try and we look at what's going on, and we try to determine for us what makes the most sense. What this week this kind of trend is interesting, and we can incorporate this into what we do, and other things for like, well, this doesn't really fit our role, and we try to ignore it, or this might be a temporary thing. We kind of pick and choose how we want to go about things. But I think also the specialty is a big category. It's not just the most progressive and most cutting edge things. I mean, I guess right now, what I'm seeing in the last few years is a lot of these anaerobics and emphasis on processing and these some of these fermented flavors that don't really taste even less like coffee than we had with when we had the third wave boom happening. So we kind of pick and choose incorporate some of the trends, and we don't incorporate some of the others. But I think at the same time, there's people who like good coffee, people who want who are aware of quality and want a high quality cup of coffee, but they don't want a fruit punch with their coffee. They want more accessible flavors. They want chocolate and caramels and sweetness and balance and richness. So most of our coffees are really in that direction. We still buy great quality coffees. We pay attention to how we roast them, we brew them properly, and everything like that. But it's not, and I think that's still specialty. That still is definitely specialty. But it's a big part of what we do. We do some of the single origins and the lighter roasts and all that. We still put our with those we try and make them as balanced and as try to tone down a little bit some of the more aggressive citrusy notes and things like that. But we do have beautiful, lovely light roasted coffees. So we have that as well. So.
I was reading that at one point you were using a wood-fired roasting technique. Is that something you guys still do, even on any scale? And how does that impact a roast differently from a more what would now be the more common, either propane or, even as we're moving into it, electric roasting?
Yeah. No, we still do. All of our coffee is roasted with wood. We're still doing that. It's more of a traditional technique. It used to be more commonplace in Italy, maybe like 100 years ago or something like that. But it's definitely much less common now. But and the difference with using wood is really the way we see it is the moisture content of the wood. So when you roast with coffee with natural gas, or propane, electric, you have a very dry heat source. So like the gas company will dry the natural gas before they send it through the pipe. So otherwise it'll corrode the pipes. So whereas with wood, there's naturally about 12 to like 15% moisture in the wood. So and that moisture gets driven off usually in the early part of the roast. So it's a more humid heat source. We're using very high temperatures for roasting coffee, so it's not like we're not smoking coffee and we're not flavoring coffee. The heat that's being generated by the wood fire, and if with the fire in that firebox is over about 1,000 degrees or over 1,000 degrees, so it's a very clean source of heat. There's really no smoke coming off of that wood. It's just if it's a clear, it's a clear, there's no smoke or flavor.
Sure. Well, that's good to know. I wouldn't have known that, and I think that if I said to someone, "Hey, this is a wood-fired coffee," they might assume that there was some sort of impact, that there isn't. I got to think that there's some permitting as far as like managing that smoke issues, at least maybe not so much in the early days, but certainly now.
Yeah, we're required, I think it's above a certain, 15 kilo roaster, you're required to have an afterburner. So we have an afterburner, same as any other gas roaster would have of that size. So, but other than that, there's no other requirement for the wood roaster. We are registered with the Bay Area Air Quality Control Board. So we get a permit. We renew our permit every year with them, and it hasn't really been much of an issue, to be honest with you. You would think that we're roasting with wood here, but
starting a fire in California to me is always nerve wracking. I camp a lot, and even then, I'm very aware of what I'm doing. This show is sponsored by Roastar Coffee Packaging, and they've asked me to help compile advice for burgeoning entrepreneurs in the coffee space. Lots of small businesses begin as family businesses. Not as many grow and survive as family businesses over the long haul. So I'm wondering, if a family of burgeoning entrepreneurs came to you and said, "Hey, we want to start a business together," what advice would you offer them? What would you say? Hey, maybe watch out for this because it's a little bit different.
I guess I'd be curious about, who's how many people are in the family, how old they are, and all that stuff, particular background and skill sets. But I mean, really, you got to have some. I definitely, you'd want to see the parents, I think, probably take the lead, but also obviously because they're older and have more experience and resources. But at the same time, you'd love to see how the children, what their strengths and skill sets are, and how they. I mean, essentially, what you want to do is basically divide and conquer. You don't want everyone trying to do the same thing. So ideally, the family would have its members be able to focus on different areas of the business, and then the parents could be the leaders of the business. So just thinking in terms of like natural hierarchy there. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's what if the family is a bit older and the parents are in their 50s or 60s, and then they have a child well into their 30s. Maybe the child well into their 30s could be a great leader and take over the business himself, or herself. But I'm just thinking about the more common interactions you might have with someone like a family getting into the business together, and just be mainly curious about how they would separate their responsibilities and delegate them out between themselves, and that's for the most part.
Also, I mean, we were fortunate in the sense that we grew up with this, so it became natural for us to kind of, the dynamics of, interacting with each other kind of became a natural thing. But I think in addition to what Luigi said, I think also you have to realize that, you think in one way it's your own business because it's a family business, but you also have to realize that there's going to be give and take, and you're not always going to get what you want, even though it's you're kind of an owner of the business. There's going to be times where you're going to have to just, not get your way. But sometimes that work. And to be honest with you, sometimes it works out that maybe you weren't right. Maybe everyone in your family disagreed with you because they saw something that you didn't. So you have to be willing to accept the give and take. And just because you're an owner doesn't mean you're going to get everything you always want. So. Um,
Especially nowadays with the size of the family, and how are you going to generate enough revenue in the beginning to pay everyone? I have a lot of questions, basically.
yeah.
I don't think that people are expecting to get paid anymore when they start out for a while. That could be me just in my own experience. But I think there's a lot of people that, especially people that listen to this show, who are starting something, while still working because it's just harder to get that thing going. You mentioned hierarchy. The patriarch of your family, your dad, Carlo, passed away recently. I'm wondering if you could just briefly, not even briefly, I'm just wondering if you could say what he means to the business, and now that, you guys have obviously been there a long time and are established, but not having his presence day to day, how has that changed things for you?
Well, he did a really good job of creating a business where, when the time would come that he would eventually pass, that there's plenty of him still around to keep his memory alive and create an everlasting legacy. So he hadn't been working here a lot for the past 3 or 4 years, and so we more or less been running the business. But at the same time, he did so much in his time when he was working here consistently and fully committed to the business, where he just created such an everlasting legacy, and he established himself as almost a mythical like figure in the industry. So there's a lot for us to go off of and remember him by every day. So his memory definitely lives on through us.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the transition goes, it was. My dad had been, even before COVID, he had been, throughout the years, he was. We've gradually been taking over more and more responsibility of the company, and he was gradually stepping back. And then with COVID, he was kind of forced to retire. So we kind of he wasn't really involved hardly at all since COVID. So it's been a very gradual and smooth transition, but his presence is still definitely missed. He was, he really was important figure to this company, and from, like I said, from a different era. He just was somebody who worked hard all his life. He was 90 when he passed, so he was coming in every. Before COVID, he was 85, so he was coming in every day, working. So he a very strong personality, very strong presence, very strong work ethic. So, he's definitely. And we have a lot of people here that have been working here for. We have people have been working here for almost 40 years. So I think I did the math a few years ago. I think the average time someone's been working here, as of a few years ago, was like 14 years or something like that. So there's a lot of people, here also were, knew him very well. So, and we're able to, he set the tone for the company, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a lesson that I've learned in my life. But when you are running your own business, you're running a family business together. You have your family life and your personal life and your work life, but you don't get to step away from one of those. When something happens, there's always going to be, I have to step into work mode, or I'm stepping into family mode. And it's a testament that you're working through that right now and figuring out the next step, which brings me to that kind of question. What is the future for Mr. Espresso?
Well, if we were a regular company, we'd have like a 5-year plan, 10-year plan, or whatever. To be honest, we just take it day by day. We don't. It's a family-run business. that we own and operate the company. And like I said earlier in the call, we don't have to feel the same pressures that other companies do, and we're not in startup mode or anything like that. And we'd like to grow, but it's not what we come to work every day thinking about. And to be honest with you, because we're owner operated, we were all pretty busy doing our jobs too. So I think we're just really focused on continuing to do what we do: roast great coffee, provide great service, and try and always do a better job of letting people know about that. And hopefully, in the grand scheme of things, people will be attracted to that organically. And I mean, with all the new roasters and competition in the industry, it's been pretty easy for us to kind of maintain what we've had, but it's also been challenging to grow too. So we're not the kind of company that's going to go out there and seek private equity or that kind of thing and say, hey, let's become a huge company now. I think we're going to continue to manage the business ourselves, and it'll go slow, and we're not going to make any drastic changes. And so I think for the time being, we're going to keep doing what we're doing.
If you guys are out in the Bay Area and you stop in at a cafe that carries your coffee, what are you going to order?
I'm usually like a drip coffee guy. Just get like a cup of black coffee. That's usually what I like to. Occasionally, maybe a cappuccino or something like that, or a latte, but I'm mostly just a drip coffee guy.
Yep. My first choice will be either an espresso or a cup of drip, just to kind of see how they're doing with their coffee as far as preparing it. And I'll also go for something that's like a house specialty or something that's unique to their place. Signature beverages, because a lot of times those can be interesting if that's something that the business itself went out of its way to develop it, and so I'm always curious about that as well.
I was hoping to hear that you run in and out of the espresso bar 4 to 5 times a day for a quick shot as you make your way through the business.
Here at work, here at Mr. Espresso, we have an espresso bar in our showroom, and so I think most of us drink espresso shots of espresso throughout the day, and so by far, out of all the coffee that I drink in my life, I'm sure at least 60-70% of those cups of coffee are like just a single shot of espresso. That percentage might vary for different folks here, but it's definitely, I'm sure, the majority of what we all drink.
John and Luigi, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you guys coming on the show and sharing a little bit about how your family started this business and where you're at now. Did I miss anything? Was there something I should have asked that I didn't that you want people to know about Mr. Espresso?
We didn't talk too much about what Italian espresso is or represents.
More. I've gotten a chance to spend some time in Italy and drink coffee around the country and also been to places here that claim to be Italian. What do you see as the differences between Italian style coffees or, what people are more used to maybe here in the United States?
I can probably answer the question from the point of a consumer, and maybe John can talk about it from the coffee side of things. But I know in Italy, when you go into a coffee bar, about I don't know the exact percentage, but a large majority of orders in a bar there are for single shots of espresso, and you will see some milk used. It's primarily for either a macchiato or a cappuccino. Cappuccino is something that someone might drink in the morning to go along with their like a pastry for breakfast. And I've noticed people drink macchiato once in a while if they want another way of cutting the flavor of the espresso. But by and large, everyone is drinking espresso. So when you're consuming something with such regularity, I think you're kind of expecting something more predictable and satisfying, and you're not walking into the experience looking to be amazed or shocked, or you're not looking to be. I don't think you're activating the same part of your brain as you would be if you were drinking a beautiful single origin coffee that was roasted really, really light. You're not. You're definitely just seeking more of like more visceral satisfaction from your coffee, and so I think that definitely drives the flavor profile of a coffee, and so on. So, John might can talk more about the coffee, what goes into a coffee like that. But yeah, that's really, I think, the difference. Whereas here in the United States or other coffee cultures, is a much wider spectrum of.
Hey there, everyone. Thank you for coming back for another episode of our podcast. That's the show for today. Thank you to our guest for sharing their time, their story, and for dropping some knowledge on all of us. You can find a recap of this episode in our newsletter online at roastwestcoast.com. That and all the links we chatted about today are in this podcast show notes. Wherever you're listening or watching, it really helps us if you tap the follow and subscribe button on the show. And while you're there, give us a few stars if you think we've earned them. If you want to go beyond that to support the Coffee People and Coffee Smarter podcasts, please tell your friends, share these shows, or buy us a cup of coffee. There's a link in the notes. We appreciate you. We couldn't do this without our presenting sponsor, Roastar Coffee Packaging, found online at roastar.com. They enable coffee businesses to best represent the quality coffee that they're producing. Besides enabling us to share these coffee stories, they also have a team of people who go above and beyond to ensure their customers get the support that they need. You can click the link to roastar.com in our show notes or reach out to us. We'll connect you directly. To all the industry partners who've supported us, who still support us, and continually uplift this effort to share the stories of coffee people, thank you. Thank you to everyone listening and watching this show, for asking questions, for sharing your coffee with us, and for being coffee curious. This show, the Coffee People Podcast, is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network. And this episode has been written, produced, researched, and recorded by me, Ryan Wolt. Wherever you find yourself today, I hope it's with a fine cup of coffee. Thank you for listening to us share the stories of coffee people. Cheers, everyone.